If you're studying for the California real estate exam, you're in the right place. I passed on my first try using these exact tools. So subscribe so you don't miss the next video. Let's get into it. Property ownership and land use controls and regulations. California subdivision law defines 3 types of subdivisions. Standard subdivision, where land is subdivided into parcels with no shared ownership between the owners of the subdivided parcels. Common interest subdivisions, where parcel ownership is separate and all owners have a shared interest in common areas, regulated by common interest open meetings laws. And undivided interest subdivision. Land is not subdivided into parcels. 5 or more co-owners take title as tenants in common. Examples of this are campgrounds or RV parks. The types of common interest subdivisions defined by California's subdivision land law are a planned development. Parcels of land are independently owned, and owners share interest in common areas, usually through an HOA. Community apartment project. Owners are tenants in common with an undivided interest in the land and a right of exclusive occupancy for their respective units. Condominium. Owners have an undivided interest in the common areas and a separate interest in a specific unit as defined by boundaries described on a recorded plan. Stock cooperative. A corporation owns the entire property. Each shareholder receives a right to exclusive occupancy of a unit and owns shares in the corporation, but doesn't hold title to the real property. Limited equity housing cooperative, a type of stock cooperative usually used to develop affordable housing. It can include certain restrictions, such as requiring owner occupancy and imposing limits on resale values. Timeshares. A timeshare is a form of property interest, usually used for vacation property. Each co-owner has the right to use a specific portion of the property for a period of time. It can be held in 2 forms. A timeshare estate is fee simple ownership. Timeshare estates may be sold or inherited. A timeshare use is a right to use interest. Right to use timeshares can't be inherited since no actual ownership of the property is involved. The owner of a timeshare use has the right to use the property under the specific terms of a timesharing agreement. In California, timeshare sales are regulated by the Vacation Ownership and Timeshare Act of 2004. Quick pause. If you're studying with me, subscribe so you don't lose this. Okay, back to it. Descriptions of property. Legal descriptions. A legal description is the most accurate way to identify the exact location and boundaries of a specific parcel of property. A property's legal description is created with a survey and may be found at the county recorder's office, registry of deeds, or through a title company. 3 primary types of legal descriptions are meets and bounds, rectangular government survey system, RGSS, also called the Public Land Survey System, PLSS, and the lot and block, also known as recorded plat. Meets are the direction and distance of a line forming the property's boundary. Bounds are physical features that define the boundaries of a property. Meets and bounds descriptions are characterized by a point of beginning. This is where the description both begins and ends. It also uses monuments to mark boundaries. The monuments are thought to have more credibility than the measurements. Monument. A permanent physical marker used in a meets and bound description that can be man-made or natural. It could be a tree, a creek, a rock, a stake placed in the ground. Monuments are used within a meets and bounds description to mark points at which there is a change in direction as one follows the boundary of the parcel. A monument is also the point of beginning of a legal description in the monument system, which is infrequently used. The RGSS, regulated by the U.S. Department of the Interior's Bureau of Land Management, divides land into townships and further into sections and fractions of sections. The principal meridian is the north-south line that runs through an initial point in the RGSS. The baseline is the east-west line from which measurements originate. East-west lines of a survey are called township lines. North-south lines are called range lines. There are 37 principal meridians in the United States. Each parcel is described by referencing the principal meridian and baseline that is appropriate to the township where the parcel is located. Every township is 6 miles square, or 36 square miles. Every section is 1 square mile, which is also 1 mile squared. Go figure. Lot and block. Lot and block systems begin with a reference to either metes and bounds or RGSS, then divide the land into lots with numerical descriptions of each parcel. A plat map with the lot descriptions is recorded in the land records. Lot and block divisions include streets, access roads, and other important features. Land measurement. Personally, here are the land measurements I found most helpful to memorize. 43,560 square feet is 1 acre. 5,280 linear feet is 1 mile. 1 hectare equals approximately 2.47 acres. 640 acres is 1 square mile. 1 square yard equals 9 square feet. Square feet divided by 9 equals square yards. Square yards times 9 equals square feet. Front foot, or frontage, is the length of property along a street, highway, or waterway. Air lot diameters are measured based on the perimeter of the land parcel directly beneath. Air lot heights are established by the city or other governing authority that has jurisdiction. Datums and benchmarks are used to measure elevation. Datum is a horizontal point of reference from which surveyors measure depth and height of various land elevations. A benchmark is a point where the exact elevation is known and marked with a brass or aluminum plate. Surveyors can use this as a starting point to measure other elevations. Measuring structures. Structure area is stated in square units, for example, square feet, square yards, etc. National standards for measuring structures are finished areas are the only spaces that can be included. Garages are never included as finished square footage. Finished spaces are only included if they are attached to the main property via finished stairways or hallways. Finished spaces are only measured if the ceiling height is at least 7 feet. There are exceptions, for example, if the space is under a stairway, sloping ceiling, or a beam that reduces ceiling height. Super quick review. Area of a triangle is half of the base length times the height. If you need to, break irregular shapes into basic shapes. Try and make it a square, a rectangle, a triangle, and calculate the area of each, then add for the total area. Government rights in land. Property taxes and special assessments. Taxation is a governmental police power that permits it to meet the need for public works by creating funding through a stable source of income that shares the burden among many citizens. Ad valorem taxes, based on the property's assessed value. Special assessment taxes, imposed only on properties within a defined special assessment district. These taxes are used to fund local improvements or services, such as sewers or streets. Benefit assessment is similar to a special assessment, but doesn't require a special assessment district to be established. Instead, all property within an improvement area that will benefit from the improvement is included in the assessment. Typical purposes include streetlights, transit, and emergency services. Delinquent property taxes create a lien on the property that is satisfied when the tax is paid. In California, January 1st is the tax lien date, when the lien attaches to the property for which the taxes are unpaid for the previous fiscal year. The fiscal year in California is July 1st through June 30th. Property tax liens take priority over all other property liens. Taxpayers can release a tax lien by paying back all taxes owed along with assessed penalties and a redemption fee. When a property owner redeems the property, the taxing authority issues a certificate of redemption. In California, the property owner has 5 years to settle the delinquent tax debt. If all back taxes, fees, and fines aren't paid by that time, the taxing authority has the power to sell the property at public auction. California property tax legislation. California makes the following properties exempt from property taxes: government-owned, owned by a charitable organization, hospitals, churches, nonprofit entities, and some veterans and disabled veterans may qualify for property tax exemption as well. A homeowner's exemption allows a reduction of $7,000 in assessed value for owner-occupied houses. Homeowners must file an exemption claim form with the county assessor. Proposition 13, passed in 1978, limits the amount of property tax a property owner may pay and the amount of any yearly increase. The law established a base value for property as of February 28, 1975, and capped ad valorem property tax rates at 1% of that value. For assessment purposes, a property's value can't increase by more than 2% per year, an inflation factor. The property's base value can't be reassessed at a higher amount unless its ownership changes or another reassessment event occurs, such as a property improvement. When a property changes ownership, the base value is reset at the property's full market value as of the date ownership changed. New construction's base value is set at its full market value as of the date construction is completed. The Mello-Roos Community Facilities Act of 1982 allows a defined community to fund community improvements through a special tax. The voters in the defined community must approve the special tax by a 2/3 majority. Typically, a developer creates a community's facilities district and funds development of infrastructure by issuing a bond that must be repaid by the property owners in the district. The assessment becomes a lien on those properties to ensure repayment. The assessment appears on the property tax bill as a separate line item. Seller disclosure of a property's location in a Mello-Roos district is required. The Morgan Property Taxpayers' Bill of Rights went into effect on January 1, 1994, providing taxpayers with the means for reviewing, appealing, and correcting property tax bills and assessments. Additional statuses used to authorize taxes for community improvements are Vrooman Street Act, Street Improvement Act of 1911, and the Improvement Bond Act of 1915. Eminent domain, condemnation, and escheat. Eminent domain. The power of a government to appropriate private land for public use. The Fifth Amendment to the Constitution requires the government to fairly compensate private owners for property taken through eminent domain. Taking. Governmental appropriation of property. A taking may or may not use the power of eminent domain. Condemnation action. The process of taking title and physical possession of private property using the government's power of eminent domain. The property owner is paid just compensation for the value of the property. Inverse condemnation. The government takes private property but fails to compensate the owner. Property owners are forced to file suit to obtain compensation. The taking may be physical, through occupation, or regulatory, where government regulations deprive the owner of the property's beneficial use and cause the property to lose its economic value. Escheat. The state's power to take the property of a decedent who dies without a will, heirs, or creditors. Public controls. Police power is the government's authority at any level to do what it can to ensure the health, safety, and welfare of its citizens. Police power includes licensing, public services, zoning, and building codes. Zoning and general plans. Zoning is a police power exercised by a state, city, or town government that classifies land based on its current or intended usage. In California, zoning must comply with a jurisdiction's general plan, which is a comprehensive policy for land use and development. Zoning ordinances. Local laws or regulations that implement the general plan by regulating zoning and land use. Regulate things like lot size, building height, and permitted uses within each zoning classification on a zoning map. Zoning ordinances may not violate the Federal Fair Housing Act. The Planning Board ensures that community growth is controlled and orderly. The board develops the general plan, which includes a budget. Other terms used for the general plan are master plan and comprehensive plan. California state law requires every city and county to have a general plan. Once a general plan is developed, it must go through an adoption process, and then specific plans can be developed. General plans in California must include these 7 elements: standards for land use and density, circulation patterns for public utilities and transportation, housing for a variety of income levels, conservation to protect natural resources, open space, noise control, and public safety. Additional planning elements may also be required, such as coastal protection, historic preservation, and management of hazardous waste. Zoning compliance is often monitored by requiring developers to make application for permits, which are only granted if they're in compliance with zoning ordinances. Common zoning classifications are residential, commercial, combination, mixed use, industrial, agricultural, open space, parkland, and recreation area. Incentive zoning allows otherwise prohibited development in return for the developer providing a community benefit. Bulk zoning regulates the density of a given area by requiring certain building height limitations, lot width, setback requirements, etc. This applies to both residential and commercial zoning. Aesthetic zoning is a way to ensure the visual and architectural consistency of an area. Oftentimes you'll see chains that look different in different areas. For example, a mountain town compared to a coastal location. That chain suddenly has a very different look, and that's thanks to aesthetic zoning. Downzoning is the process of assigning a lower density use zone to an area previously allowing a higher density. Density zoning refers to a number of units per measurement, such as houses per acre. Spot zoning rezones a specific property for use within another zoning area. Exclusive use zoning allows only one type of land use in a particular zone or district. Mixed-use zoning combines complementary uses, such as residential and commercial, on one type of land. Cumulative zoning allows any use that would be allowed in a higher use, less intensive zone to also be permitted in a lower use, more intensive zone. Cluster zoning allows a developer to place residential properties close together, leaving large open spaces for community amenities. Zoning actions may include non-conforming use, deviates from current zoning but is grandfathered in, moratorium, temporarily halts new property development, special use permit, aka conditional use permit, allows use that's not normally permitted but is considered an allowable use within that zoning, such as a church within a residentially zoned area. Variance is a permitted deviation in the zoning ordinance requirements, typically granted when the zoning has created a hardship or burden on the property owner. Both special use permits and variances require a public hearing before they're granted. Many localities have a zoning appeals board, which oversees challenges to zoning actions. Subdivision, land that's divided into lots for development. Plat map of a subdivision that represents a tract of land, showing the boundaries and location of individual properties, streets, easements, and other pertinent information. A developer submits the plat map to a planning board or zoning commission. California's Subdivision Map Act requires coordination of subdivision design, streets, and utilities with the municipality's general plan. At the federal level, the Sunshine Act is part of the Freedom of Information Act. Each state usually has its own version of the Freedom of Information Act or Sunshine Law. In California, the Public Records Act and the Brown Act protect the public's access to information. Local governments may also have their own sunshine laws. Meetings held by planning and zoning boards must be open to the public because of sunshine laws. Building codes. Building codes are rules that specify the standards to which certain building projects must comply. These codes help ensure safe, properly functioning buildings for their occupants. Building codes address the method of construction, materials used, and the building's safety and sanitary standards. California uses uniform building codes published by the International Code Council, ICC. Local jurisdictions may impose additional standards specific to the area, for example, like withstanding earthquakes. California's state housing law sets minimum construction requirements and occupancy levels for dwellings. Under this law, no construction or building alterations are allowed until the plans for construction are reviewed and approved by the local building inspector and a permit is issued. Building permits are issued locally as a signal to a builder or contractor that building codes must be followed. During or after completion, building inspectors review work to ensure building code compliance. Most municipalities allow existing construction to be sold and occupied without meeting current building codes. However, any unpermitted work should be disclosed to buyers. State and local agencies work together to ensure that building codes are met. This includes enforcement of sanitation requirements by a local health officer. Construction standards are maintained in part by requiring that most work be supervised by general contractors licensed in the state. The licensing authority is the Contractors State License Board. Contractors wishing to obtain licensure in California must meet education, experience, and examination qualifications and post a bond with the state. If materials and labor will cost more than $500 for a construction or remodeling project, a licensed contractor must be used. Certain exemptions exist, including an owner's own work on a building that isn't intended for sale within 1 year of completion. That is land use. If you're serious about passing the California real estate exam, subscribe right now so you can keep studying with me. Keep the momentum going. The next video in this series is linked right here, so go watch that next and come back to study again tomorrow.